Oh, hello and welcome to the Client Catching Podcast. Now, I want to set up today's interview with a bit of a question, and that is, what do you really think happens when your business scales and grows? Now, you see, the promise of scale is being essentially able to earn more while doing less, yet the reality can sadly be quite different. Because what often happens to many entrepreneurs and business owners when their business grows and becomes successful is they ultimately become pretty trapped by that success. Now, this usually happens because your entire business model, it's kind of been destined for a dead end at the very beginning. And that's not necessarily anyone's fault because you know what it's like. You start a business because it's your passion and all that kind of thing, and you don't necessarily start and design it with the end in mind. And that end in mind is having a business that you own and that can largely run without you. Now, obviously, that's the bad news, and don't worry, there is some good news coming because changing your business model, it's not difficult. In fact, you probably have all the right tools right now at your fingertips because if you've got experience creating amazing results for your clients, you're pretty much ready to go. And there is even better news because my guest today is an absolute master at helping you scale a service business without killing yourself in the process. Now, he helps service providers and consultants turn their six-figure practice into a seven-figure business. And he's built and sold tech startups as well as consulted for the largest international corporation in high-tech, finance and retail on 4 continents. And today, he takes what he's used to teach in the Fortune 500 and applies it to entrepreneurs looking to scale their business. Now, he's also a 3-time author, a speaker, strategist, and the host of the podcast, The 6 to 7 Figure Show. Now, his latest book is called Scalable Consulting. Use a high-ticket program to transform your 6-figure practice into a 7-figure enterprise. So, as I'm sure there's many of you out there that would love to learn how to do this, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome my guest today, Frank Bria, onto the show. So, Frank, welcome to the Client Catching Podcast.
Adam, thanks so much for having me. It's a real honor to be here.
It's an absolute pleasure. And we're on I think we just sort of touched on it. I'm going to date the podcast ever so slightly, but we're on a bit of a slightly historic day, I guess, for us here on this side of the pond. And you guys are going through your own history. And that is, we've just started our national lockdown and you guys are trying to figure out who's going to be the guy in the White House. So
yeah, I think we wish we were going into lockdown right now, probably.
Yeah, I mean, and that sort of brings to mind that there is a lot of change going on. There's turbulence out there in the world, at large and all the rest of it. And I guess that can be almost seen as a bit of a metaphor for how businesses are developed. It's turbulence. There's a lot of things going on, and we sort of touched on it in the introduction there. But before we sort of touch on to some of the things I really want to cover today, I was just sort of keen to get your and curious to get your sort of views on how things have been changing in the last 6 months within businesses.
Right. Well, that's true. So, again, going back to what today, the today of when this podcast was is being recorded, we've been going through a crazy year. I mean, I don't think anyone would have ever predicted or expected what was going to happen. And for service businesses in particular, it has been a mixed bag. I've some business owners that have been, their incomes have been completely decimated by what has happened. And then you have other business owners who are, I've talked to a number of them where they kind of say, Frank, I don't want to say this out loud, but this is the best year we've ever had. And it really does come down to a business model and taking advantage of the trends that are there. There's some business owners that see trends quickly and jump on them and make changes. And then there's some that don't. And I'm not saying that's anyone's particular fault, but I think what we do have to recognize is that as entrepreneurs, we have to be ready for change. We have to be ready because it's not like change is something that comes. It's not like, oh, there'll be change next week. No, there's change right now. Like change is happening all the time. And we have to be ready for it. We have to be able to recognize it, see it where it's there. We have to be able to know whether it applies to us, right? If we're going to have to do something about it, and then we have to make quick decisions to react to it. And I think the inability for an entrepreneur to make a decision, to react to change, is probably one of the key factors in whether or not that entrepreneur is going to struggle. That making quick decisions and reacting to new information is probably the number one success factor for a CEO of any company of any size.
Yeah, and that's something that's come up a fair amount of times with other guests on the show as well. It's that adaptability factor. It's being able to spot opportunity, but also spot danger coming around the corner, and pivoting is the buzzword that's going around at the moment. But it kind of encapsulates some of the things that people need to be thinking about. And it's interesting that change is an ever present. The only thing constant in life is change, as the famous quote goes. And I think that there's two types of change. There's change that you can anticipate, and there's change that you can't. So there's kind of the proactive change and the reactive change. And we've had to react to a certain degree to the circumstances, and that kind of change, that's the thing that I think everybody is focusing on, or heavily focused on, because that's the thing that's shouting loud right in their face, and it's a thing that is requiring the most attention right now. But I think that the type of change that I certainly feel that you have your expertise in, and we sort of touched on it in the introduction, is that change around a model and a business model. And that's something that can be more proactive, and you can consider it. So why don't you sort of describe what you mean in terms of what's the kind of before business model that you see people struggling with, and the after business model that you help them to put into place that helps them achieve the scale that we're all after?
Yeah, the service business life cycle is pretty common. So as you mentioned, it's something that we see. It's a pattern. It happens again and again, but yet it's really difficult to adjust to. And there's a number of reasons for that. But let's just describe the life cycle first. So first of all, most people in service businesses will start out essentially being the product, right? I am the product. I will do something. I've got knowledge, or I've got time, or whatever it is I can sell. So this is particularly true with consultants. A consultant will go out, they'll either leave a job or an existing experience, and they'll leverage that experience then for other clients. And so you got people, and you're like, hey, I'm a smart person, like, hire me, I can come in and fix that. And of course, the people who know you and know you're a smart person, they're going to hire you. They're going to bring you in, and you're going to do that. And so almost every service business starts off with the idea that the entrepreneur is the product, is the thing, the person who is going to be executing on that service. Very few service businesses just, pop up one morning and suddenly it's like, oh, I've got a staff of 12. It's like, not how it works. So that business model is successful at the beginning. It's very successful. It's a great formula. It works. In fact, I would tell anyone who's starting from scratch, that's the easiest business model to get off the ground. I mean, compare it to software, manufacturing, product development, like any of that stuff is much more difficult. It takes a lot more investment, a lot more time. It's in capital, frankly, you got to put money into that stuff. But service businesses tend to be easy to start. So we launched that, and we're in phase one, I'll call it, where we're the product, right? And then we get to a place, kind of phase two, where I run out of time, and I can't be the product anymore. And I'm not going to be able to sell anymore. I can't bring on another client because I can't deliver anything. Or we think, well, I'll just hire somebody. But the problem is that we've turned everything into us, like we're the product. So a lot of service businesses have a hard time hiring people because they won't do it as well as I do. Yeah, that's true. They won't. Like, there's no way to solve that problem. You cannot hire enough of you. Why? Because you're an entrepreneur. Like, would you go hire on someplace? Probably not. So this skill, the skill set that you're looking for is essentially the superstar, rock star type, right? You as the entrepreneur, you're going to have a very hard time finding it. And even if you do, even if you're lucky and find one person that might fit that role, they're probably going to go start their own thing pretty soon, right? So it's not going to be a long-term solution to the problem. So we end up with this phase where we have a growth plateau. So we've done research on this in the United States. We haven't done this globally yet, but in the US, we can take a look at census statistics for businesses. And if you look at the category for consulting, it's really fascinating. You look at the incomes and the overall revenue levels, and they plateau out, like about somewhere between $250,000 and $400,000 US per year is about where these businesses stop. They almost none of them get beyond that as a percentage. Now contrast that to other business types, software, manufacturing, retail. They tend to go higher, a lot higher. And it's not because their product margin or their profit margins are that much better. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're much worse. But it's just difficult to grow a service business beyond that. So we see it in the data. It's not. You're not crazy. It's not you. You're not just bad at this. It's really difficult to break through that barrier as a service business.
Yeah, because I think that. I mean, it's certainly the experience that so many people I talk to. I've been on that roller coaster. That's exactly how you could have described, but how I started, right? And probably everybody that you talk to has almost an identical story,
right?
I think as well, especially talking about the changes that we're seeing and some very smart people, senior people that have been in corporate roles, for example, have now found themselves needing to go and maybe find something else because of their situation and the job market and all the rest of it. Now they're probably about to take this step into thinking, well, I've got all these years of experience. I'm going to go out and become a consultant or some form of service provider based around the skill. So they kind of go into that thinking, well, I've got my network and all the rest of it. I'm just going to go out there and hang my sign on the door and I'll be fine. Different story though, isn't it? In reality, when it, as you say, you can get to that first stage fairly simple if you've got a decent network. It's getting to stage 2 and then 3, 4, etc. that I guess you don't necessarily think about. You haven't started with that end in mind.
That's right.
And you don't realize that there is that plateau looming.
That's right. And that becomes actually the fundamental challenge for most people, is that when they get to that place where they're stuck, it's almost like, well, all I want to do is to keep going in this direction, right? I've started off in a particular direction. I'm just going to keep pushing through. And we feel that resistance and we just think, oh, I just have to go head down into it deeper and harder and more time and more energy. But the problem is that direction is broken. That direction's dead. That's a dead end you're on. And so this resistance you feel is not just the wind's harder and I've got to push through it. It's that you've reached the end of that line and it's time for you to shift.
So let's talk about that shift. And I've referenced, starting with the end in mind. Why don't we do that? Why don't we sort of start with the end and what the kind of that leverage and scalable service business looks like, and then work back through the steps on
sure.
Somebody that may well be listening to this and they've just started, or maybe they've got some success and they've been established for a few years and they're doing pretty well, but they are reaching either the plateau personally or in the with the business, and they're having to rethink all sorts of different things. So where is I guess there's never an end point. We all know that in business. We even had that quick conversation at the beginning, but there's never that you never arrive at the destination. But where are you trying to get to?
Yeah, so let's contrast the end with where we started, right? So when we start off and we think, okay, well, I'm just going to go out and do everything. The end is exactly the opposite of that, right? The end is to have a business where you can fire yourself from the business, right? So imagine having something running that doesn't need you at all. Not only are you not the product, you're not anything to it. Now, I say that in that it's your IP, it's your, you created it, you ran it. But you have to think of yourself at the end as the investor. Imagine owning stock in your own business. And the only thing that you do is you open up your statement to take a look at how your stock is doing. Now, there is a long path between starting off and getting there. But that's what I want you to imagine as the end state. The end state is you're the investor. So there are a number of things we have to do from to get from here to there. But the first thing we have to think about is I need to build a business that makes me redundant. Mm. That's the first thing. And that's scary for people, especially when you start a consulting business, as you mentioned, Adam, because you've been let go from a position and you have to do something else. So now you're thinking, how do I make myself redundant? It's almost like it's, against our own, it's like cognitive dissonance, right? To think about it that way. But we have to think about processes. And so the very first question that you have to answer is, what is the outcome for my client? Not what is the product, not what's my secret sauce, not what do I do, but what outcome does my client actually get out of working with me? And this one question is the thing we skip over a lot. A lot of business owners think, well, I'm trying to scale, so it's going to be all about process. It's going to be about hiring. It's going to be about growth and investment and all this stuff. And all of those things are important. But the problem is that all of those questions just push you further into that resistance, right? They are basically the equivalent of going heads down into the wind. But that's not the right direction to go in. So we first have to ask ourselves, okay, what is it really that this business is about? And it's odd because we think, hey, I'm doing pretty well here. I'm doing 6 figures a year in income. Why am I thinking about these foundational questions like product? But that, in fact, is the question. We have to move in a different direction because this direction that we're in right now is not going to work.
And so there's a couple of things before you move on. There's a couple of things I want to sort of pull out of that. That jump out to me, and I want to sort of make sure that are clear to anyone listening. And that's, you sort of talk about thinking about it like an investor. And I used to run a marketing department for like wealth management and all the rest of it, and talk to a lot of investors. Yeah. And the interesting thing is they have a very different mindset.
Yes, they do.
To the majority of people. Investors think leverage. They think, where am I going to get the most return? And they also think about, investors don't just go and invest in anything. They have a plan and a process, and they've thought it out and all the rest of it. Now they will have, and they also, which is coming on to your next point, an outcome in mind. They will have a style of investing. Are they investing for value? Are they investing for the long term? Have they created their portfolio in a way that can actually sort of incorporate a number of different things? And I'm not an expert in that side of things. It's just the way that they think is very, very different. And we spend too long thinking, like, how can I use my time to build wealth? Whereas they think, how can I use leverage to build my wealth?
Right.
It's a very different way of, and coming on to the thing about the outcome as well, because that's sort of the outcome that they're, obviously thinking, but it's so important. And the very specific point I want to sort of make clear that you said there is, it's the outcome for your client. So you build your business based on the outcome that you can achieve for a client. And most people will go into something like a service business and they will just talk about what they do.
Right. That's exactly right.
I'm a graphic designer, I'm a HR consultant, I'm a financial advisor, I'm this, that, and the other. And that is all you're thinking about. Even if you were to think ahead, 3-5 years ahead, I'm still going to be providing graphic design services or financial advice. Right. That doesn't really say anything different, does it?
Yeah, it does not. And so the first big barrier is getting past the idea that you're a title, right? Mm. That we just boil down what you do into a description of your skill set, because again, that's not useful. It's kind of like saying, I just need to hire someone who's really good with a hammer. Well, why? What are you doing with that hammer? Are you going to build something? Are you going to tear something down? There's lots of things you can do with that hammer. You have to sort of make a decision about what that is. But the second problem with outcome, and again, when we say outcome for your client, that they care about, that this is the thing that, keeps them up at 2:00 at night, in the morning, and they wake up in cold sweats, your client. So what is it? Well, in the personal development space, this is a big challenge. So a lot of people who are in personal development will think they're claiming or, stating some kind of an outcome that matters to their client when they really aren't. For example, I hear a lot of people, when I ask them, what outcome do you create for your client? They'll say, I help them get clarity around their life's dream, right? I don't know what that means. I'm sorry. No one knows what that means. I hate to
Kind
be
of
the
an
bearer of bad
oxymoron,
news.
isn't it? It's like, hang on,
Yeah,
you help
yeah,
people get clarity, and I have no idea what you're talking about.
exactly, right. So I always tell people, clarity is not an outcome. If you are in the clarity business, you need to think further. And a lot of people, a lot of people get stuck here. I'll give you an example. So one of my clients a few years back, she came to me and said, I'm having trouble expanding the business because no one kind of gets what I do. And I said, well, what do you do? And she said, well, I help female executives get work-life balance. Okay, well, we kind of all know conceptually what work-life balance means, but I asked her and I said, if you saw a woman walking down the street, would you know if she had work-life balance or not? No. Okay, could you ask her 3 questions to help her understand if she had work-life balance? No. So how are you going to market that? Like, if you don't, if your entire audience can't even agree on what this looks like, how are you going to market it to people? How do you connect with them emotionally? How do you say the words that go, oh my gosh, she totally gets me? You can't. So we dug in a little bit further, and what we realized was, for her clients, they applied work-life balance to achieve something in their lives that was important to them that they couldn't get any other way, right? Because most people that don't have work-life balance, other priorities are taking them off of what they really want to do, right? So she changed what her positioning was for her outcome, and she said, I help female executives with family, again, so we got family and career. I help them set and achieve one audacious goal for the year. And by the way, if your audacious goal is reorganizing your pantry, I am not your woman, she would tell people. So this completely shifted what she was doing. So instead of like talking about work-life balance in some ethereal way, her entire marketing campaign was transformed. She'd bring these female executives in for a free lunch, they'd for an hour. She would basically get them to think about this audacious goal. And they'd write it down, and they'd stand up and they'd read it out loud, and everyone would applaud. And there's all this emotional momentum around this, right? And then at the end of the lunch, she had the easiest close job ever. She basically said, who here would like to achieve that goal this year? Raise your hand. That was it. Like, you're in. So when we align with something that people actually care about and are emotionally invested in, it is so much easier to get them to sign on. Now, that sounds like it's just a marketing problem, but it actually is the first step to process orientation, because now that I know what the outcome is, I can actually build a process around that. Again, when it's just me and I'm just trying to be smart and I'm going to come into your business, I mean, think about the pitch for most consultants, right? So what we do is we kind of ask a lot of questions, and we dig around till we find a problem, and then we tell you about that problem, and then we're really smart about fixing it. Like, that's just not it's just not something I can repeat over and over again.
Or what's that old joke is, I'm a consultant and I will steal your watch to tell you the time. Right. That's one of the that's one of those jokes.
I had a Fortune 500 CEO tell me one time, so large corporation, multi-billion-dollar corporation, say, listen, consultants are just people that we hire to come in and tell us to do stuff we've already decided we don't want to do. I'm like, yeah, that's pretty close.
Maybe you should do it then. I don't know.
Yeah, it could be.
But it's I mean, that's an old joke and all the rest of it. And most people I know that do this, they actually do provide value. Yeah, but I think the reason why there is that cliche around is because people haven't gone through, certainly if you're a consultant and you're going in other businesses, you haven't defined that outcome, and so you can't give those people clarity. And if thinking about that story there about the CEO, if you were a consultant that went in and said, well, this is the specific outcome that I will help you achieve, he's going to actually listen rather than go, not another one of you, I'm going to sort of keep my hand behind my back, thank you very much. Right. Do you think though that there is that part of the reason why people don't necessarily think about it this way is, partly just you don't know what you don't know. But there's a part of you as well that's kind of scared about promising an outcome.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we're all petrified to death of failure. I mean, that's like the number one fear that any human being has. Forget entrepreneurs. Like we just are scared of failure. We're scared of finding out that, especially, not to make this a gender specific thing, but for a lot of men, being found out as a fraud is like a deep seated fear for most men. But any entrepreneur is scared of failure. And so, yeah, of course, a lot of times we look at an outcome and we go, well, that's kind of scary. I don't really want to stick my neck out for that. So let's pull it back in a little bit, right? I mean, think of like a social media consultant, right? So social media consultants would say, we get your Twitter account working, so we make sure the tweets go out and all that good stuff. Well, that's controllable. That's something I can feel like I've wrapped my arms around. But again, that's not what your client's like waking up at 2:00 in the morning thinking, oh, my tweets are out of control. That's not what they're thinking. They're thinking, I need more leads. I need more money coming in. And that's social media is supposed to serve that end. Well, if we don't connect ourselves to that end result, then we're just a cog in the works. I mean, like to kind of give an example of the auto industry. Do you want to sell brake pads or do you want to sell cars? Which one of those two things do you really want to build a company around? And I'll tell you that your client is going to be much more likely to, you got more clients that want cars than brake pads. So are you going to be a cog in the wheel, or are you going to actually connect to the outcome? And by the way, that doesn't mean you have to personally deliver it all, right? You're going to have strategic partners and people you can work with who deliver the pieces of that value chain that you can't do it. But absolutely, you want to be seen as the one-stop shop. You want people to come to you for that. And again, that's process. It is much easier to identify each of those steps along the way as process than it is to, say, well, we just do tweets and that's it. That's all we do.
And there's a huge piece in there that I don't want to slip by, and that is you talk about the promise, the outcome, what it is that you want to deliver, but you don't necessarily have to be the one that delivers all of the moving parts that lead up to that outcome. And I think that's huge, because that's a big thing to get your head around. If you're starting from a position of, this is my title, I'm a financial advisor, but if you're promising an outcome that whether or not you can necessarily, I guess, promise or work towards with just you doing that, it could be, I'm a financial advisor, but my big outcome is to help entrepreneurs build a business that can be sold for a 8-figure exit in 10 years. Right. Like that's a big outcome, right? You're not necessarily going to be the one that can actually do all of those moving parts.
Right.
But you can
you're not going to come up with the cash. You're not going to, they still have to do the work. And I mean, financial advisor is a really great example of this, right? Even if you pull back the promise a little bit, financial advisor helps you, let's say, just retire, right? Retire well, right? And financial advisor brings together all of this great stuff. They bring together investment opportunities. They bring together mutual funds and stocks and all these things. That's not them. They don't do that. They're bringing in partners. They're bringing in other people. So if you look at the largest corporations in the world, that's what they do. Yeah. They are the one-stop shop for a particular thing, and they have strategic partners that they bring in. And by the way, you probably don't even know the names of those companies, right? So that's the thing that you want to focus in on for growth. If you want to get to 7 figures, it's not just a matter of surviving. If you want to grow 10x from a service business, you really do have to reframe where you are from a business model perspective.
Yeah. And there's a few things in there that I don't think everyone always thinks about. I mean, use the word strategic partner. That's a big part of my model, for example. It's, and even the introduction to this podcast is, I even sort of say that, you can't do this alone. Like, building a business is not easy. You can't do it alone. You'll need people that work for you on your team. You need people that are in your industry helping you, strategic partnerships, all sorts of other people. That even if you are just a one-man band, right, you still need other people. Like, you can't do it on your own. It's absolutely impossible.
Right. Yeah, you can't do it on your own, and you can't do it with all of the stuff that you thought was working. The metaphor I like to use is like a rocket ship. As a rocket ship is going off into space, what happens? It gets to a certain stage and it jettisons the entire lower section. So we don't think about this, but this is actually a big mindset problem for a lot of entrepreneurs. That bottom section of the rocket contained all of the fuel that got the rocket to that spot. And what does the rocket have to do? If it wants to continue to move on forward, it has to jettison that entire section. So for us, that's like, wait a minute, I don't want to jettison all of the stuff that got me successful. This is the model that I've been using that got me to where I am today. I don't want to jettison that. But what happens if the rocket doesn't jettison that lower section? It falls back down to earth. Like, it does not get to continue on in its trajectory. And that is a big problem for a lot of us. We get stuck with this idea that everything I've been doing up till now has been working. And so shifting off of that feels like danger. It feels dangerous, right? But it's exactly what we have to do.
Yeah, and it's very, very common. And that's kind of like the sweet spot that I like working with people with. They've got to that point where what they've been doing to get them to one level is not going to take them to the next. And they're in that crossroads. It's like, I don't actually know what to do. I'm established, I'm successful, but I can't seem to get through to the next phase. And I really just don't know what to do. And that is a common thing. And there's a great book, I don't know whether you've read it, by Michael Masterson, Ready, Fire, Aim. And that's a book that basically, it talks about the different layers of a business, and essentially you almost have to reinvent your business at certain levels as you grow and as you scale. And that, for anyone, just is worth reading, even if you're right at the beginning, because it kind of gives you the ability to predict where you're going to go and what you're going to need to think about next. That without that sort of foresight, it comes as that, the change comes as that surprise. It's like, whoa, I wasn't expecting this. It's like, actually, you can, I guess, preempt the challenges on the way by just learning from other people that have been there before and are actually sharing their knowledge. And that's my recommendation in terms of sort of thinking about where you are in terms of size of business and growth level and scale and all that kind of thing. So
yeah, that's a great book. It really is.
Yeah, and he knows what he's talking about. Grew or part of Agora, wasn't he? I did some work for them a while ago. They're an incredible company. Like, when you get inside and you see what process looks like, it's incredible. But side point. So let's talk about then what's then the actual deliverable to a client of a scalable service business, because maybe that's not 100% clear in terms of, okay, kind of get it from a conceptual point of view, but what am I actually doing?
Right. So essentially, it's at this point, now that you've rethought the direction and we now have an outcome-oriented focus, we're actually set up for success. Okay. And it then becomes people and processes. And I've got the order backwards: processes first, then the people to execute them. So once we have an outcome, I can now set up what that process is going to look like. And, what are the steps that I need to take my client through? Every single client is going to be starting from the same point, right? So we call that A, and we want to get them to the same point, say Z. So how do I get them from A to Z, right? And writing down literally every single one of these things and understanding what that process is going to look like. And this is an incredibly important exercise, because the moment, what a lot of entrepreneurs do is they will go through that process and they'll hit a place and then they'll go, well, now it depends. Right now it depends. If they're this, we have to do that. And if they're that, we have to do this. And that right there is your warning sign that there's a problem. Anytime you hit it depends, you're going to run into trouble. And the it depends is a function of I don't have a clear enough definition of either exactly who the person is that I'm working with and the state that they're in, or exactly the outcome I want to get them, right? So this it depends is still ambiguity that we have to iron out of our business model. So once you can write down the steps without any it depends along the way, then you're set up for success in a repeatable process that I can staff and do over and over and over again. I mean, we really have to think about this like a manufacturing line, you know? Again, going back to cars, if I'm making cars, there isn't a place in the manufacturing line where the cars split off into two different directions, you know, because, well, sometimes we're going to do this, and sometimes we're going to do that. Like it's the same manufacturing line. And a lot of the things that we think are different are actually really the same. So, you know, it doesn't matter what color the car is, because on that last step, when it paints all of the metal, different colors come out of the paint machine, but it's still the same stage. So we have to kind of think very creatively through this process. Like, how do I do the most for the most amount of people with the least amount of change to process? So that's the first thing you have to do is get the processes right. And then it comes down to people. Now, it's not about hiring a bunch of people, because that's, again, a big mistake that a lot of entrepreneurs make, is they start hiring people. Oh, you know, if I could never do this task ever again, I'd be happy. So let's go on to Upwork and let's find somebody who can do this for me, you know, as an example. But that's actually a formula for failure, because you're not staffing the right thing. You're just staffing the painful thing. And that's not necessarily the right thing to do. So what we do with a lot of our clients is we'll take them through an exercise where you actually write down an org chart for the company, an organizational chart for the very first time. And people are like, it's just me. It's just going to be one box at the top. And so we talk about functional org charts. So forget who staffs them, but your company, if you think about this process, and again, you have to have the process down first. And that, again, that's a big mistake people make. Figure out the process, and then you can actually write down, well, I'm going to need 3 people to do this part and 1 person to do this part. And you can actually write out this full org chart and identify the skill set of the person that needs to be there. And they should be very specific. I need a writer, you know, I need a Facebook ad marketing expert or whatever. You can actually put skill sets associated with these boxes. And then you go through and you put names in all the boxes. And at the very beginning, it may be Frank, and all the boxes, because I'm doing all the work myself. That's okay. But now you know exactly what functions you're going to have to hire for, and you can start to prioritize them. Okay, well, the first person I need is a writer. I need a writer. So that's the first hire I'm going to make. It's going to cost me this. This is how many clients I'm going to have in order to afford it. But now we're making strategic decisions about staffing the organization, as opposed to me waking up in the morning and going, oh my gosh, I have to answer customer emails again. It's going to drive me crazy. So let me get a VA in here to do it. Like, we have to be really strategic about what the choices are, rather than just kind of responding as we go. So by setting up process and then having a functional org chart that helps you understand what your people needs are going to be, that is how you plan for the scale.
And I think that, and this comes up a lot as well, around the importance of process and systems and all the rest of it. And this is always from people that have achieved a success and they've got a business, you know, they've got a lot of experience, and they all talk about the importance of process. Unfortunately, what a lot of people hear when they think process is, no, I'm not process minded. I can't create processes, right. Or, oh God, it's the most boring thing. I just want to kind of be a free, happy entrepreneur that just figures it out as he goes, and blah, 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 and all that kind of thing. So I think it's really difficult until you feel that pain so much to help somebody understand why process is so important. But if you had to sum it up, why would you say the process is I believe it's one of the most important fundamentals after your offer and the outcome that you're promising your client? What would you say to someone?
Yeah, because uh, business growth is about automation fundamentally. And what is automation? Automation is taking something that works and doing it again and again and again and again and again. And if you don't have that thing that works at the beginning, there's nothing to automate. There's nothing to grow. Imagine how difficult it is if you, let's say you wanted to build a 10-story building, right? So I build the first story of the building and then I knock it down. And I build that first story again and I knock it down. And then I build it again and I knock it down because I've got nothing to build on, right? If I want to build 10 stories, I'm going to have to build the first and then build on top of that first thing. So without a process, that's basically what we're doing to our business every single day is we're knocking down the first story of the building every single morning. We wake up,
100%. And I've kind of led you with that question because what it brings onto, and your answer brings me onto, it kind of links it to that sort of talking about the outcome and then how people might be fearful of making a promise around an outcome. And how can I make that promise? Well, you can make that promise when you've created a repeatable process that nigh on guarantees that outcome.
That is exactly right. And when people, because people, again, in the service business get hooked onto this word guarantee and they start to freak out, right? And I'm not talking about because I talk about you need to be able to guarantee the outcome of your client. I don't mean that in a legal sense, right? You don't have to be like legally guaranteeing. In fact, I think legal guarantees like money back guarantees and things like that, they're lazy. That's the lazy way out. What I tell my clients is if you think about process, I want you to imagine that you have to give the person all of their money back plus double, right? If you don't get the outcome. Just imagine that for a second, like get it into your emotional being, right? And then after you get through the fear of that for a second, guess what? You're going to add in so much additional process to make sure, right? It's like, okay, well, so I guess if I have to double guarantee the results, I better call my client before the due date to make sure they're really okay to give me back the things that they need on that due date, right? So we start to put in things like accountability. We start to put in things like mentorship into our service business. And that wouldn't have shown up in the process at all if we had thought about it. It's easy for me to say, oh, well, just start in with what we do. And if you don't like it, I'll give you your money back in 30 days. Like that didn't force me to think anything about how to support my clients in actually getting that outcome. All I did is I said, well, I guess we'll have a refund rate of 8%. So we'll increase prices by 8% in order to cover the additional refund rate, or whatever, right? That's lazy. That's lazy. It really does come down to exactly as you mentioned. We have to think about all of these different things. And when you do that, then you basically are guaranteeing the outcome because the process, if I go through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, there's no way I can't get them to where they want to go.
And I agree that the whole sort of thing around, guarantee, like that word, it instantly triggers something in people's mind. It's kind of like, oh, well, that gives me an out, or it gives me a reason to stop, or when things get tough, oh, I've got 30 days and I never got round to it, or I'm just going to stop. Like that gives people an out and gives people an excuse. So I don't necessarily think it's always in the best interest of your client to offer a money back guarantee after a certain period of time. I think
certainly not as a substitute for you doing the work to actually make sure you have a decent product, or a decent service level.
100%. And I prefer the term that's been evangelized by Jay Abraham, which is risk reversal. And if you can figure out a way to reverse the risk rather than it being a guarantee. Like a guarantee is a form of risk reversal, and yes, it does work in certain industries and all the rest of it. But if you can figure out a way to reverse the risk to the client, but at the same time show that they still need to be part of the process to achieve the result. Right. It's a very different but nuanced thing there. But yeah, and I think that the word guarantee is just but we had this sort of conversation before. It's so interesting though how many people that offer services of any description they don't necessarily, I'm going to use the word guarantee, but they don't guarantee the result, or they don't do everything necessarily to achieve the result. It's like, well, they didn't achieve the outcome. Oh, well, that was their fault. Whereas you're a very big believer, as I am, that it's kind of your moral obligation to ensure that your client gets the result once they come on board, and they give you their time, their trust, and their cash. It's your moral responsibility to help them, because you know you've got a process that can get them a result. Sometimes people just need a few extra things along the way.
Right. And that to me is barrier to entry in the service business. Like, I think you need to be emotionally and morally invested in your client's success. That has to be, if you don't have that, none of the rest of it is going to matter, because you're not going to grow. And we all see companies like this, right? We have all heard entrepreneurs say, hey, I'm going to teach you what you need, and the rest is up to you. And, if you don't put into action what I teach you, that's your fault. And there's a lot of that bravado out there. And first of all, that's garbage. Like, I just want to say right now, unequivocally, do not hire those people. Okay. It's garbage. And I'll tell you why it's garbage, because we would never accept that attitude in anything else. I mean, imagine if, you sent your child to school and the maths teacher stood up in front of the class and said, I'm going to teach you what you need to know. If you don't do it, it's your fault. You're never going to learn maths. You're never going to get out of my class. We would immediately say, get my kid out of that person's classroom, right? But somehow, like in entrepreneurship, we think that's cool. No, there's so many other things besides teaching that need to happen for someone to execute, right? A service-based business is essentially a combination of three things. It's skills, accountability, and mentorship. Okay. Your client may in fact need to learn skills, but that's not going to be enough to get them to what they want. No. And if you don't believe me, then go get brain surgery from the guy who just read the textbook. You're not going to do it, right? You know that your client needs more than that. And so this attitude of, well, I'll do my part and then just throw the rest over the fence to you, that's just not, it never works. It doesn't work in any other element of helping people. And I don't think it's particularly helping people. I just think it overloads them with more stuff, more videos they need to watch, or workbooks they need to fill out, but actually no results.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, it's funny how that. And first of all, I'm glad that my maths teacher was never like that. I mean, I literally I scraped through like that. I mean, dyscalculia and ADHD all mixed up together, which means maths was never my strong point. But I did have a good maths teacher. And that was all about, okay, he's struggling with the skills, but the mentorship, the accountability, and it wasn't just the teacher. It was bringing in my parents, I remember at the time, to, really help with all that kind of thing. And I scraped through. I just about scraped through. But none of that would have happened if that teacher had stood up there and gone, well, figure it out. I'm teaching you what I'm teaching you. If you can't do it, it's your fault. Well, Jesus, talk about
exactly. I started my career as a math teacher. That's why I taught mathematics at the university, and so I can tell you that doesn't work.
No. But it's an example of if somebody who can literally not add numbers in their head, literally that is not something I can do. Found out I was ADHD in my 30s, which kind of had a piece of it. But if somebody with those kind of things can be nurtured and taught to an outcome, which was get your, at the time, GCSEs in maths. Yeah. Then that shows the power. Like, just, let's step back from the business side of things. Right. It shows the power of, or the requirement of, when you're actually offering an outcome to somebody, it's not just about teaching what you know.
That's right.
It's that accountability, that mentorship, and all that kind of stuff. And, I am, I'm aware that we are sort of, coming towards the end of this, and there is so much that I could, continue to ask you about it. But I do know that in order for people to get a real sort of deep dive into the actual process of this, and literally step by step, how you would go about sort of thinking about this as a business model, how you would go and implement it, how you would create all the, the org chart that you referred to, how you would plan for your outcome, all that kind of thing. It's within your new book, isn't it?
Yes. So the book Scalable Consulting, we basically took everything that we've been doing with our clients and distilled it down and made it super pragmatic. I mean, you mentioned at the beginning, I've written a few books, and one of our earlier ones from 2015 called Scale. The feedback we got from that was, oh, this is really good, but it seems kind of theoretical. Like it's still very conceptual. And that's nice. I mean, sometimes you do need to read a book that's very conceptual, but this is not that book. This is, okay, this is what you do in week 1. This is what you're going to do in week 2. This is what you're going to do in week 3. So we took all of the processes that we execute for our clients and we wrote them down and put everything in there. You literally have the entire plan of attack for how to do this in the book. And it takes you essentially from, okay, so I have a skill where I can execute and I get good results, right? So if you're just starting out, you've never had a client before, this might be a little bit further along for you. But if you've worked with clients and you've gotten some good results, you've got testimonials from people, you know, by hook or by crook, as we like to say, doesn't matter how you got it, you do know how to provide a service to a client, then it's probably a good place to start.
And I do know that you can get the book, but then you can also it comes with or if you go through the site that we'll leave a link to, not only can you get the book, but you've got a literally, do you call it the black book or something else that goes with it?
Well, we have a couple of things. So with the book, we have what's called the field guide, and the field guide is every template, every email script, every, you know, page script that we reference in the book. A lot of people like that. Some people don't. You know, some people like to be able to put their own things together, and they're really talented copywriters, or they're really talented with outreach or however, and so they don't really need that. But everything that's referenced in the book in terms of, okay, go write, you know, go put a piece of content out there that highlights this. We have a piece of an example in the field guide. So it's a nice companion to the book. A lot of people like both. But, you know, you could just buy the book by itself too and pretty much get what you need out of it as well.
Yeah, I wanted to sort of mention that one as well, because I think as we covered there, some people just think process and all the rest of it. Like that field guide essentially gives you all the processes that you need in order to actually, you know, do it. There is nothing left to, you know, there is complete clarity in that field guide, right?
Yeah, well, it's I would like to think it's it takes the how do I make this work for me part out, you know, because a lot of times, again, when you teach a skill, there needs to be mentorship. Like, how do I take this and make it work for my own individual situation? So a lot of the templates are like, okay, insert your 3 bullet points for your, you know, thing here. And so it takes that concept and it molds it into, you know, what you're going to do in your own business.
Absolutely. And you can get the book, and also you have a program that actually walks people, and you give them not just, obviously the book will give them the skills, but then you give them additional skills and also the accountability and the mentorship as well. So I'm sure the information you'll be able to find on the links that we'll leave in the show notes. But if somebody's around and, you know, not able to check this out, what's the website to go to take a look?
Scalableconsultingbook.com. So just www.scalableconsultingbook.com, and you can pick up a copy of the book there. And, you know, as you mentioned, there's other options as well, but you know, that people should feel free to you know, leverage the elements that they think they need, and we're certainly not trying to push stuff that people don't need. So just take what you need, or what you think works for you, and if we can be of assistance, of course, we'd love to be. There's elements you can't get out of a book. You know, sometimes you need someone to kick your butt. You know, so we have a program that does it, as you mentioned. But yeah, that's a great place to start.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, if people do want to reach out and talk and connect with you directly, are you sort of LinkedIn? Are you a user of LinkedIn? Where do you like to connect best?
Yeah, LinkedIn's a great place to connect. What people will find is, because a lot of people ask me, well, Frank, is this like your thing now? Like you just do this helping consultant thing? Or no, I'm actually my consulting practice has become something else. Is, you know, we've scaled it. And so I use LinkedIn for that. It's still part of my, you know, I'm a working service provider to corporations. And so when you come onto LinkedIn, that's what you'll find, that profile. But feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Do mention, that you either heard me on Adam's podcast or whatever. I do get a lot of connection requests, and it's hard to filter through them. So if you just send me a little note and say, I heard you, then we can connect and continue the conversation there. But LinkedIn's I'm probably most active there.
Awesome. And I'll put a direct link to your profile under the show notes as well. But nice. Frank, I think, as I say, we could probably have gone on for a long time. There's so much in this conversation, and unfortunately, Mother Time has caught up with us. So just want to say thank you ever so much. It's been incredibly insightful, and a lot of things for people to digest and take away, and I definitely suggest that you go and at least check out Frank's book or some of the other resources that he offers on his site as well. So make sure you go and do that, and reach out to Frank with any questions that you have. Connect with him on LinkedIn. Otherwise, Frank, thank you ever so much for joining me, and all I got to say is happy fishing.
Thanks so much.